Who's not coming down the track? Who's not coming down the track? It's a me what she is red and white. Me what she is red and white. Ain't nothing finer in the red. Ain't nothing finer in the red. When the drunk are marching straight to bed. Let 'em up. Let 'em up. Yeah.
What's up, y'all? This is John back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. We are joined by one of our favorite guests, Connor O'Gara, to talk about his alma mater, the Indiana Hoosiers, going into the national championship game. But Indiana, the Bears, do you feel like 2021 Georgia fans right now?
Yes. Who also had the benefit of a Braves World Series. Yeah, this is that. I've died and gone to football heaven. Lord knows I have been standing outside the pearly football gates for a very long time. I waited 15 years to see the Bears win a playoff game. I am sitting here as someone who is 35 years old with a 2.5 year old and a wife that I've known for 15 years. And the entire time that she has known me, the Bears have not won a playoff game. So that element in itself is just bananas to think about. And then the IU thing is a different stratosphere because when we went to school, IU was 13 and 35 in our 4 years, no sniff whatsoever of a bowl game. And this was the biggest joke in college football. And the thing that I would always used to say to people who found out what I did for a living, they would ask, oh, then who's your team? And I would say, well, I went to Indiana and we didn't have a football team. So to be here now talking about Indiana as a more than touchdown favorite in the national championship, I am as surprised, probably more surprised than you and everybody else is.
I will say, one of my proudest takes from the offseason was in May. We did like a way too early hot takes. And I said, Indiana will be in the championship conversation longer than Penn State.
I like that. I should have piggybacked. I should have just I could have played it. People would have said that's a homer take. Penn State. This is the time. My God, was it not? And I do feel a little bit guilty for that. And one of the things that I look for when it comes to um like I think just good down the line Indiana coverage is how the beat reporters are talking about a specific team. I know there's been a lot of discussion this week about the place of beat reporters and media and all that different stuff, but when my guy Zach Osterman, who does great work covering all things Indiana for the Indy Star, when he predicted them to go 10-2, it kind of sent my antenna up. And I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Why did I put Illinois in the playoff instead of Indiana? That's when I kind of knew at that time I might have been looking at this team through a very specific lens, and I should have opened up myself to the possibility that Indiana would start off 15 and 0 and potentially be 16 and 0 for the first time since 1894 Yale.
Um, Fernando Mendoza notably would have beaten Miami last year if the referees understood what a targeting call was.
Probably. Yeah, I would agree with
So,
that.
getting into it, Fernando Mendoza, obviously he won the Heisman. He's had a phenomenal season. But throughout the playoffs, he hasn't had like the most gaudy numbers when it comes to quarterback play. Even though they've just demoralized every team that they've played so far. And going against a defense as good as Miami's, do you think they changed the game plan to put the ball in his hands a little bit more?
They're probably going to have to attack what's a banged up Miami secondary in the first half. Xavier Lucas, the former Wisconsin transfer, he's out for the first half of this one because of the targeting penalty that he had in the second half against Ole Miss. And it's going to be an interesting chess match because obviously Indiana knows Corey Heatherman, the Miami defensive coordinator, very well because he was the James Madison defensive coordinator on Kurt Ignati's staff before Brian Haynes had that position. So there's going to be a little bit of a back and forth there. And I think if you're Miami, you would ideally like to be able to see your loaded defensive ends, Mesidor and Bain, be able to pin their ears back and try and get to the quarterback. Now, the difficulty with that is that Miami did that actually successfully. If you just talk about pressures against Ole Miss, they had 17 pressures against them, but they only got to Trinidad Chambliss one time. It was on the opening series. They had the intentional grounding call, and they weren't able to get home. Getting home against Fernando Mendoza is so much easier said than done. If that were such an easy thing, by now somebody like a Dan Lanning or a Matt Patricia Patricia would have been able to figure out how to do it. And instead, this is a team that has been playing so on time. And that's the difficult thing, is that they have not had a high volume passing offense. Lord knows the 5 incompletion stat through 2 games of the College Football Playoff is just almost one of those ridiculous things you have to check and check again to see if that's true. But Fernando Mendoza has played on time, and he knows when he has to get rid of the football, and they execute these timing routes. The Elijah Surratt back shoulder fade is basically a cheat code at this point, and all the different things that they can do with this offense. There's a reason why teams have not been able to necessarily tame them for 60 minutes. You might be able to get yourself in a competitive game like Penn State, like Iowa, like Ohio State, but it's making these clutch plays down the stretch, and that's where I think Fernando Mendoza is going to be leaned on, probably more so than expecting him to throw it, 35, 40 times in this one.
And so the battle that I think kind of decides the game in a lot of ways, if it fit in the flow of this conversation, I would have loved to have had this be the last question, but just the way it works out, it doesn't. Indiana's offensive line against the Miami defensive line. And so the Indiana ground attack has been absolutely elite so far in the playoff, 200 yards per game, 2 touchdowns. They have allowed 4 sacks so far in the playoff, but Miami's defensive front, for the level of competition, the style of game that had to be played, and especially the A&M game, it's a little bit difficult. But they're allowing 85 rushing yards per game and have 15 total sacks. So the question that I have: who flinches first?
I tend to think the Miami defensive line flinches, and it's I compared it earlier on our show to it's almost like the team, like Phi Slamma Jamma. They used to say you don't want to let them get dunks, because once they get dunks, they get more comfortable, they get more confident, and that's when this defense is so dangerous. Miami, once they get sacks on the quarterback, that's when they're so unbelievably dangerous. And that's when you need someone like Pat Coogan in the center of that Indiana offensive line, who's just been a revelation, MVP of the Rose Bowl at the center position, which is just an absurd thing. He is so important for being able to call out who is going to be coming from where and being able to diagnose these things at the line of scrimmage. They love to be able to do the Keontae Scott blitz from the second level. That's a big part of Miami's defense. And when they're able to get those huge negative plays, he's often at the center of them. So that's I think going to be an interesting battle too, besides just the obvious of Bain and Mesidor being able to protect, and kind of knowing that Indiana's been a little bit leaky at times on the right side of that offensive line, but also knowing at the same time they're going to be well aware of that. This pass rush will not catch them by surprise. I mean, they saw an elite defensive line with what Ohio State does. They had an elite defensive line that they had to go up against when they faced Penn State. Like, this is not necessarily going to be anything new, and that's not to say that Miami is on this same exact level, because at their best, I think they're the best in the country with getting to the quarterback. But I do think IU is going to be able to handle that. They can handle that with balance. They don't get into one-dimensional scenarios very often, and I think they will have a game plan ready to go for that.
So Hoosiers' ground game has been phenomenal. Like I said, averaging 200 yards and 2 touchdowns per game. So what is the key to getting that part of their game plan going in this one?
Andy Staples has talked about this. They do this like duo blocking and stuff, and they're really great. And Miami does the same sort of thing. I think Hemby finishing these runs is kind of everything. They've developed a really nice 1-2 punch in the ground game. But you could look at all the numbers and say 218 rushing yards per game. Throughout the season, you already mentioned the 200 that they've averaged in the playoff. What I think is kind of an underrated thing is Fernando Mendoza plays urgent and not antsy when there is a clean pocket, and you cannot turn your back on him and play man coverage and not have anyone that accounts for him, because that's kind of when he can hurt you. And he's done a really good job at that in those scramble scenarios. They don't necessarily roll out a whole lot of design runs for him or anything like that, but those scramble runs always feel like they come at such an important time. It's 3rd and 7. Oh man, that thing that they thought was going to be there isn't necessarily open. Oh, they had the exact right coverage for Charlie Becker. Oh, no big deal. Fernando Mendoza is not going to panic in these moments, and he's going to be able to take off. And that's a piece of this ground game that I think you can trust in those key spots. So yes, it is so dependent. Like, if they're breaking off 6-7 yards per carry those first couple drives, and this is just a hot knife through butter, and IU can just be interchangeable in its backfield, that is such bad news bears for Miami. And I think that'd be the worst sight for Corey Heatherman, because IU will recognize that. They will lean on that, and then they'll hit you with the shot plays. They'll still be able to hit you with those timing routes that they like to run with Cooper and with Surratt and Becker. So I do think that IU should be able to do some things in the ground game that even just go beyond the typical, are they creating running lanes, and is Hemby able to run through contact?
And the most gettable part of the Miami defense has been the secondary really throughout the season. But in the playoff, they're allowing 267 yards a game. What does Indiana need to do to take advantage of that?
I think they need to trust their receivers in these spots. Like they have these advantages on the outside schematically that just kind of show up. And even against experienced secondaries like what Alabama had, like what Ohio State had, they can just make that right play in that spot. And I think that's what you have to trust in key moments and not necessarily go, oh, you know what, it's 3rd and 10. Let's just live to fight another day. Let's just run it up the middle. No, no, you have to trust that you guys can go up and make big time high leverage plays because they've been doing that all year. I mean, they really have. Like I think if IU loses this game, it kind of forgets that it has that in its bag and all of a sudden stops challenging those corners on the outside. You have to test these corners. I think if you're Miami, you would ideally like Indiana to try and throw the football knowing that your pass rush is your biggest strength. But at the same time, there would be this oh crap moment if Mendoza's hitting the back foot and knowing that he's going to get rid of the football. Because if that happens, I think IU has that advantage on the outside in a variety of places. And with a quarterback that can work through his progressions like Mendoza's been able to do so calm and comfortable in this college football playoff, I think that bodes really well. So I already mentioned the Xavier Lucas injury. I think that's really important for Miami, and I'll be interested to see kind of how they're able to help on the back end because I think Ole Miss kind of figured some things out, especially in the second half of that game against that Miami secondary. It's the clear weakness of that unit. They've got a couple of guys that seem like they're playing through some injuries at this point of the season. So I think that's probably going to be the biggest mismatch in this game.
So moving over to the defensive side of the ball, a lot has been made, and I've seen a ton of graphics about it on social media. But the size of Indiana's defensive front in comparison to Miami's offensive line size. What's your take on that?
Don't care. Don't care. I like not worried. That might sound bad because Lord knows, I think that people have questioned how this unit was going to perform in some key spots and what's it going to look like against Ohio State, what's it going to look like in the rematch against Oregon. And they just kind of keep showing up. Like for whatever reason, this group is always one step ahead. And their defensive line, I think, had a massive question mark coming into the college football playoff when they lose Stephen Daly, the guy that came over from Kent State, had 19 TFLs, and he gets hurt celebrating the Big Ten championship. And it's kind of like, wait, are they lacking those playmakers up front? Are they still going to be as disciplined? I know they still got Kamara up front, and Aiden Fisher so good at the linebacker spot. Are they still going to be able to do these things? D'Angelo Ponce, is he still going to be able to impact the play? And they have been able to be this run stuffing unit that is not bothered necessarily by its lack of size. I think if these guys were all 360 pounds looking like nose guards all the time, this would be a much different feel of this Indiana defensive line. But they're disciplined and nothing really phases them. I thought such a key moment for them in this college football playoff was that 4th and 1 in the Rose Bowl, wherein Alabama is just trying to fool them, trying to catch them off guard. And Herbstreit called it out with 6 or 7 seconds left on the game clock. Just like, this is Indiana. This is not going to work. Those guys are too experienced. They're not going to flinch. They're not going to flinch with Miami size. I don't think that's necessarily an issue. Now, Mark Fletcher finishing runs. Okay, now we can talk about something that I think is going to be really difficult to slow down just at the level that he's playing at right now. But I trust Indiana's discipline, especially on that defensive line. I do think that they will be that group that is going to look at Miami size maybe in the pregame and go, all right, we've seen that before. We can handle that.
Yeah, what I said earlier this week about it was, I don't care how big you are if you're too slow to move me.
It's a good point.
It,
It's
I,
kind of the name of the game.
302 pounds at almost 20 miles an hour hits a lot harder than 360 pounds at 12 miles an hour.
It's very fair. And look, Miami's going to try and lean on IU. I think if they're playing their game and if they're leading late in this one, it isn't all of a sudden 35 passing attempts for Carson Beck. And I know I'm preaching to the choir by saying that. It's having this multifaceted ground attack. It's using Malachi Tony is an extension of this ground game, and trusting that your blockers in space are going to be able to hold up. And maybe it's not going to work at the rate that it did against Ole Miss, who has a lot more issues in terms of the missed tackles. They had 17 missed tackles in that game. You can't assume that with IU. They've been so remarkable in that department. But I do think that if Miami is winning and playing well and executing their game plan, it's being able to have at least a 50-50 chance at the line of scrimmage and trusting that Fletcher's going to be able to finish runs with authority.
So speaking of Mark Fletcher, Indiana phenomenal defensive stopping through the playoff, 58 rushing yards per game. But how is it possible to stop Mark Fletcher?
I think it's possible to contain him. Now, game flow can dictate some of that too. And that's where IU can hope to lean on, because if all of a sudden, it's a two touchdown game and you have this advantage on Miami, wherein all of a sudden Shannon Dawson thinks he's got to get it all back, that's when IU can probably pin its ears back. So that's been questioned at different points. As remarkable as this run has been for Miami, there have been moments, really more so in the A&M game and then in the Ole Miss game, in which you could kind of question what exactly Shannon Dawson was doing with some of these plays. And when they're running a flea flicker instead of giving Mark Fletcher consecutive carries, you're scratching your head going, do they forget that they have that guy? Because he's awesome. He's going to return as one of the best backs in all of college football next year. But yeah, I do think that there is a chance that obviously, like, Miami would love to be able to give him 25 to 30 carries in this one. He's not at 100%. Like, he's still dealing with the late season injuries, but I do think that your best chance, probably if you're IU, of containing him, is hoping that game flow is going to do that for you. And this could end up being one of those games in which we look up and go, oh, Mark Fletcher only ended up having 15 carries because IU led by 2 touchdowns, and maybe Miami felt like they had to get it all back.
Uh, you know, kind of speaking of trying to get it all back, as we've seen through his extensive college career, getting to Carson Beck is the best way to force him to make his patented throw to a wide open defensive back. So how does Indiana pressure him with that offensive line?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you look at what he's done well in this college football playoff, and you say he's played within the system. And I
Passed
was,
for 120 yards ish.
he's played the way that Shannon Dawson kind of hoped he would, and the way that Shannon Dawson realized he needed to have him playing. This is a limited offense still. And that's not to disrespect Fletcher. It's not to disrespect Tony. And I think Marion's had some great moments. Marion caught the only pass that was 20 yards downfield that Miami has completed all college football playoff. Carson Beck is 1 for 11 on those throws. And it was a play in which Carson Beck is able to extend, kind of roll out to his right. And there's a coverage bust on the back end by Ole Miss. And then it's Marion over the top. And it's obviously a huge touchdown in that game. So I do think that Miami being able to rely on Carson Beck to work through his reads and try and layer throws, I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. I've seen too much of this team to think that all of a sudden they're going to bust that out and that they're going to be capable of it. Although IU likes to take some chances in the back end, like they can occasionally let up that big time play, and they need to be able to hit on that. And I do think if Miami misses those opportunities, that's a bad sign. But what's going to be fascinating is how they try and use the quick passing game, because as much as you would love to be able to develop what I would call the extension of the run game with those quick hitters to Tony on the outside, that's also kind of the same thing that IU blows up. And what happens if Miami runs that play twice, IU blows it up, and then Shannon Dawson deviates, and we spend a half hour scratching our heads going, wait a minute, Malachi Tony, he's not hurt, right? He's out on the field. So I think if you're Carson Beck, you have to approach this game from that standpoint. I think Miami would like this to be a 17-14 game in which it just comes down to late plays. And who knows, give yourself a chance late. I don't think they want to get into a back and forth with this Indiana team. I don't think that's the type of pace and the type of style they'd like to be able to have. The time possession battle, they're 5th in the country in time possession. IU is 6th. So they would like to lean on you and not have Carson Beck all of a sudden airing it out and trying to capitalize on these 20, 30-yard completions.
Do you think Indiana at any point just decides to leave no defenders on the left side of the field at the goal line?
To be fair, I'm going to give Carson Beck credit for it. You watch the replay of that, and it's man coverage that Ole Miss has in that spot. And obviously, you would ideally like a spy in that situation to account for that. A guy that at the same time has not had a rushing touchdown since week 3. Huge spot. You're trying to protect the lead, trying to protect a potential national championship berth. So all those things. If Carson Beck simply panics and goes to his first or second read, that lane never becomes available. It only becomes available because he actually lets that play develop. And from that standpoint, I'll give him all the credit in the world because there are a lot of guys in that spot that I think they would have panicked. They would have tried to roll to their right and just hope that something opened up. And instead, he kind of scans his progressions. And to his credit, he sees the thing that eventually opens up. And that's kind of where you'd like to be able to have a veteran quarterback in that spot. Shannon Dawson wants to be able to use Carson Beck more. He had more scramble yards against Ohio State and against Ole Miss than he had at any point since the Georgia Tech game last year when he was at Georgia. So I do think that this is going to be a part of their game plan. I think it kind of has to be, but IU hasn't exactly allowed that. So we'll see how that goes.
So the passing numbers for Indiana, I think, are going to be pretty skewed just because of the way that they've gotten out to big leads in the playoff. Um, but other than probably 2 to 4 interceptions from Carson Beck, what do you expect out of the secondary?
I don't expect 4 interceptions. I
I
don't.
said two
I'll say
to
that.
four.
He's had, I think, what, 5 turnover-worthy plays since the Louisville game. They
Yeah, but
figured out. They
in their
figured out
losses, he's thrown an average of 4 interceptions.
definitely, and I think IU can beat him even without throwing interceptions. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I do think there will be a few of those plays. If you set the over under, I think the over under probably for Carson Beck turnovers in this game is 1.5. And if IU is able to turn that into the over, it's a boat race. Like I think that's the case. Where I think it's going to be really interesting is some of those strip sack possibilities with him, because this is someone that's been pressured on the smallest percent of his dropbacks of any FBS quarterback this year. I mean, that offensive line has been remarkable, and it's also been because he gets rid of the ball quickly. Gets rid of the ball quickly, and there aren't a lot of those instances, like I just mentioned, where he has time to scan his progressions and see something potentially open up, like he was able to do against Ole Miss. So I don't think they're able to necessarily force 3, 4 turnovers in this one. If that is the case, we're talking about chicken wings in the fourth quarter. All right. And I'm not predicting that. I think Carson Beck puts up more of a fight than that, but this defense, it is unrelenting and it does not allow you to be able to make mistakes. It capitalizes on them, might capitalize on them in the first play. If they throw, if Miami throws a pick six on the very first play of this game, I I don't want to say it's over, but my God,
You'll
talk
be
about
finding
taking
your
the
way
life
out
out
of
of
the
that
press
place.
box for chicken wings.
Yeah, I'll be searching for chicken wings. You got some chicken wings on the sideline. I'll supply them. Just make it a thing. Yeah, it would be, in my opinion, the ultimate sign that it's just IU's night, IU season.
So, what is your biggest concern about this game?
My biggest concern about this game is that I'm going to try and be professional as I can in the press box. No, a little bit though. I don't consider myself some IU diehard in that sort of way. So I don't want to pretend like that's the case. I have so much pride for my university. I love my school and the life that it's helped kickstart for me, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And I don't want to pretend that I'm an Indiana football fan in the same way that you are a Georgia football fan. So it'd be stolen valor for me to be able to sit here and say that, but. My biggest concern of this game is that it's close late. This Miami defensive line has the 4 or 5 sacks. And instead of this IU team that has been so good at responding to mistakes, they just can't quite get that one play that they need late. The play that's always, for whatever reason, been there. And not necessarily even just like the Omar Cooper play, but just how Fernando Mendoza responds to throwing a pick six against Oregon. And then they come back and then boom, they hit Elijah Surratt, back shoulder throw in the end zone. Like they do these things that just make you think they're robotic, and they embody Kurt Signetti. So if they all of a sudden can't find those key plays late, and all of a sudden those breaks down the stretch don't go their way, that's really the only thing that's going to make me truly nervous. Because even if Miami's defensive line looks really good early on, remember Bama's defensive line looked really good. that I think they had like 2 sacks in the first series of that game against Mendoza. They had 3 sacks on him in that game. And I think Miami's defensive line is certainly better than Alabama's, but everybody's saying, oh, LT Overton's back. Like you got Tim Keenan back. This defensive line is healthy as it's been, and you've got a real chance to be able to get after Fernando Mendoza. And he just didn't care. So I won't even look at that and say that's some deal breaker for this game. So yeah, I think it's just if it's a close game late and knowing how fortunate IU has been in some of these spots where they've been able to kind of make their luck, the missed field goals with the Ohio State game, like there could be some of those moments that just don't go IU's way, but I don't expect them to all of a sudden just be outclassed by this Miami team and that's, oh my gosh, this is an overwhelming weakness that they can't overcome.
And what are you most confident in?
The game planning. One step ahead. They're just one step ahead. Everything. It's hard to imagine Miami throwing a bunch at them that's going to catch them by surprise. Feels like at this point, everybody kind of knows what Miami does well and what Miami doesn't do well. And if all of a sudden IU is playing on its heels, that's going to be a stunner to me. If it just looks like after the first half of this game, they have no answers whatsoever for this ground attack and they're just getting bullied up front, that would kind of stun me because I think the biggest credit you can give this coaching staff is how well prepared they are. When they step on the field, this team is ready to go. They group tackle, they are unselfish. The way that they're able to adjust their offensive game plan. I mean, Dante Moore throws the pick six and then comes down and has this unbelievable drive, and it's 7-7. We're thinking, all right, we got ourselves a ball game. And then IU after that just made him look like he was living in a nightmare. And they pressured him 18 times in that game. I think it was 18, maybe it was 20. I don't remember. But they do things like that that just make you think they've got this. They're robotic. It's fine. It's 2010s Alabama with how they respond in these key situations. So I am most confident that they're going to show up ready to go. And for a team that's never been there, it's weird for me to say that I don't think that the stage is going to be too big for them. So that's what I feel really good about going in is that even if they get punched in the mouth early, they're going to be ready to go and they're going to make those adjustments.
And we have a couple of general questions. One's more serious than the other. Before we have you pick the game, it's an obvious pick, but we're still going to ask a question. So, what is your take on the ACC giving Miami all of the playoff revenue?
Had to change things. You have this pending doom scenario at the end of the decade wherein if teams want to pay that was at 2030, they can pay the $75 million buyout and potentially look elsewhere if the TV revenue still isn't necessarily there. And you have to make your best teams happy. And this is their way to try and do that. They're in a different spot, I think, than some of these other conferences, knowing what that buyout figure is going to be, knowing how coveted they are with a lot of their teams in the specific regions and specific states that they're in. So I'm okay with it. And maybe that's a little bit of an unpopular take. But I think it just gives you all the more motivation to want to get there and want to get to that stage, knowing that you're going to clean up that revenue. You're not going to have to redistribute it to the rest of the conference. Conference pride is a great thing to be able to have. I think the ACC has it watching Miami, but being able to bring home that big check, I think it's something that you kind of need to see your teams in the ACC, who, by the way, had not had a college football playoff or a New Year's Six bowl victory in the 2020s until Miami went on this run. And I think that matters probably more than anything else.
And then this one is from Mike. He said, if Indiana wins the Natty, the last thing for Sig to accomplish is to play Georgia Southern in Statesboro, a place where he has never won in his career. Why is Curt Cignetti afraid of freedom? Who is the Bald Eagle mascot?
It's a good point. I got no answer for you. He said last year, we don't just beat top 25 teams, we kick their you-know-whats. And I was really skeptical of that. And I didn't necessarily like it when he said this offseason that they're going to cancel Virginia so that they can start scheduling an SEC team. I was like, buddy, you ain't there. Not at all. And then this year happened, and they've beaten top 10 teams by an average of 25 points. And you're kind of left going, you might just be exactly what you've been talking about for a very long time. So I don't think that man fears anything. Maybe he fears small talk. I don't think he fears a specific mascot, but then again, who knows? This is all very new. And at 64 years young, I think that Curt Cignetti probably has a few more experiences left in this life.
My hot take is that he refuses to play Georgia Southern again because Georgia Southern beat Nebraska.
And why would he care about beating Nebraska, about the Nebraska connection?
Well, because Scott Frost was so good. It just he's back down in your neck of the woods. I thought you were a Scott Frost respecter.
No, and I actually worked in Nebraska, 30 minutes from Wood River, where he grew up, and so I've followed the Scott Frost story quite closely. No, I don't think he would fear Georgia Southern. They still have is it? Yeah, it's Ty Helton, right? Yeah, Ty, former USC coach. That's there. That beat
I thought
them.
it was Clay Helton, and
Or
Tyson
Clay
Helton
Helton,
was
not
with
Ty.
Western Kentucky.
That's right. That's right. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
confusing my Heltons. My bad. My bad. That's right. No, I don't think he fears them. I think he would probably be willing to overlook the Nebraska loss and get that on the schedule.
What's funny is the quarterback that beat Nebraska actually just transferred out of Georgia Southern. He was still there somehow.
Time is a flat circle. TJ Finley's on his seventh school. Anything is possible.
They've been saying that TJ Finley's the next Cam Ward since Cam Ward was like a sophomore in high school, aka TJ Finley's junior year of college.
Have they been saying that? I have
No,
not been saying
no
that.
one's ever said that. I just
Okay, good.
The transfer to Incarnate Word is hilarious.
Would expect nothing less.
All right, so picking the game, obviously we know where you're going to go, but I am going to ask for a spread and over/under pick since we know where you're going with the money line. Spread 8.5. Indiana's favored. Over/under 47.5.
My final score, I have the over slightly hitting.
Life's too short to pick the under.
That's what I always say.
All right. Thank you for coming on and talking to us. It's always a good time. And everyone not in Miami is pulling for you guys this weekend.
I appreciate that. And I hope everybody in Miami, all of the Crimson that will be in attendance, wherein Hard Rock Stadium is going to be at least a 50-50 split. I would like to think that there are even some Miami fans that are maybe watching this like they're in Moscow on Christmas Day and it's 1986, and they're thinking to themselves, that Rocky cat, he's pretty impressive. I know Ivan Drago is a machine, but that Rocky guy, I got all the respect in the world for what he's coming into our building and doing. So maybe that'll be the Miami sentiment coming away from this one.
And that kind of is a question that I forgot to ask. Do you really think it's going to be a 50-50 split in Miami's home stadium? I mean, their fans don't
At
show
least
up for their games, but
they'll
you think
show up
some
for this.
out-of-towners would come in.
Yeah, they'll show up for this. IU fans will be there. I'd be stunned if all of a sudden, after going to the Rose Bowl, after going to the Peach Bowl, IU fans are just like, you know what, national championship, can't really cut the expense. But Kelly School of Business has produced more than just Fernando Mendoza. There's a whole lot of money with what is the biggest living alumni base in America. There will be plenty of IU fans. I think at least a 50-50 split. I'm curious if it ends up being a noticeable IU advantage.
I will say I think there's a lot of Indiana fans stopping through in Savannah on their way to Miami based on I've seen a lot of obviously Indiana, but Illinois, and Missouri tags with IU stickers all over them in Savannah this week.
Love it. Hey, any Illinois fans, Mizzou fans, whoever, just Midwest rooting for IU. I'm
No,
all for it.
those tags, but Indiana stickers.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's good. Look, that would be my mom. My mom has Illinois plates. I'm from the state of Illinois. She has Indiana stickers. My mom is an Illinois grad who is all in on all things IU. I have had Purdue graduates. I have had Kentucky people that have reached out and said, IU, we want to see this happen. Do this for the little guy. Do this for the power conference football program that has been held down in the deep end of the pool and told, don't get up until we say to get up for as long as we can remember. And IU is playing for everyone this weekend, or I guess Monday.
And, as Georgia fans, it's more of anybody but Carson Beck.
I get that.
All right. Where can the people find your stuff?
Yeah, appreciate that. Saturday Down South podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We are once or twice a week right now. Just kind of depends on the schedule, but A lot of coverage coming from the national championship. We have a pod that just dropped today, just dropped Thursday afternoon, and then at CJ O'Gara on Twitter, SaturdayDownSouth.com. I always tell people you don't want to be working in the afternoon. You want to be reading a free college football site and clicking around on a bunch of different stories. Just bookmark it. Don't work. Click on our stories. You'll be entertained.
All right. We appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, man.